You know, the morning it happened, the morning I lost 40 years of my life in about 2 hours, it started quiet, calm, and ironically beautiful. My name is Tom Sterling, and I live in what used to be a picture-perfect little enclave called Willow Creek Preserve. Emphasis on used to be. It's the kind of place where every lawn is surgically manicured, and every mailbox is the exact shade of federal blue. But the real jewel of my property, the thing that made my tiny front yard feel like a cathedral, was the great sycamore. This wasn't just a tree, folks. It was a giant, a gentle colossus that had been here since before they poured the first foundation for these stucco houses. Its canopy was so wide, so generous, it covered half my roof and filtered the brutal Texas sun into this soft, dappled green light. My kids practically grew up in that tree. I built their first rickety treehouse in its lower limbs, and my late wife, she always swore the wind singing through its leaves was the sound of our home's heartbeat. It was an anchor, a living monument to our family's history. But of course, not everyone saw it that way. Especially not the high priestess of our homeowners association, a woman named Beverly Kincaid. Beverly moved in about 7 years ago and immediately treated the HOA presidency not as a volunteer position, but as her personal divine mandate. She was all crisp white linen, enormous sunglasses, and a clipboard that was practically an extension of her arm. She specialized in regulation. If your bird bath was an inch too tall, if your roof tiles had the audacity to attract moss, or if your flower beds used a color she hadn't personally approved from her Pantone swatch book, you were getting a notice. And for some unknown, deeply personal reason, my magnificent, harmless sycamore became her Goliath. The complaints started subtly, dripping into my mailbox like poison. First, it was the shade, allegedly killing the pristine St. Augustine grass on her side of the property line. I countered with a professional landscaper's report, confirming the grass was dormant, not dead. Then it escalated to the leaves. A dangerous debris field, she called it. I mean, come on, it was autumn, Beverly. The tree was doing what trees do. But the real fight, the one that made my blood boil, was when she started attacking its safety. Every month, at the HOA meetings held in her aggressively odorless living room, she'd stare me down and bring it up. "Mr. Sterling," she'd purr, that condescending smile fixed on her face. "That old growth of yours is an insurance liability, isn't it?" Its roots are surely compromising the community sprinkler system. I always kept my cool, even though I wanted to yell. "Beverly," I'd say, sliding the latest arborist's report across the table, a certified, sealed document, "the sycamore is perfectly healthy. I pay a professional to inspect it every 6 months. The roots pose zero threat to any neighboring property or the main water line. It's not going anywhere." Her smile would tighten, just barely, but her eyes, they would narrow with this cold, terrifying resolve. "We shall see, Tom," she'd murmur, making an ominous little scribble on her clipboard, acting less like a retired tax auditor and more like the Supreme Court justice of all flora and fauna. The conflict dragged on for months, maybe a year. I got the county involved. They sent a zoning officer who laughed out loud at Beverly's claims and issued a formal statement that the tree was protected and healthy. I thought, okay, I've won. Logic, law, and nature have prevailed over manufactured outrage. I couldn't have been more wrong about Beverly Kincaid. She wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat. She was the kind who just moved the battlefield. The day she executed her little scheme, I drove away for work around 7:45 a.m., sipping my lukewarm coffee, glancing at my sycamore one last time. The morning sun was hitting its leaves just right, making them glow gold and green. It was an ordinary Tuesday, I found out later, from my neighbor across the street, old Mrs. Henderson, who sees everything from behind her lace curtains, that around 10 a.m., a huge industrial flatbed truck rumbled down Willow Creek. It was hauling a massive wood chipper, and the side read, "Premier Tree and Land Services." 3 guys in neon safety vests parked right in front of my driveway. Then the hawk appeared. Beverly Kincaid, striding across her perfect lawn in tailored khaki shorts and a sun visor that looked like it cost more than my mortgage payment. Clipboard in hand, she immediately started gesturing dramatically at my sycamore. Mrs. Henderson said the workers looked confused, hesitant. One of them actually had the good sense to ask, "Ma'am, are you the homeowner for this property?" Beverly didn't even blink. "I represent the Willow Creek Preserve Board," she snapped, practically flashing her clipboard like a police badge. "This tree has been declared a structural hazard and violates community bylaws. We have approved its removal." She then handed them a thick folder, a stack of what I now know were the same fake, homemade documents she tried to pass off as official minutes and permits. The crew, I guess they just shrugged, saw the check, and fired up their equipment. The sound that followed, the first mechanical roar of the chainsaw tearing into the lower limbs, Mrs. Henderson said it shattered the stillness of the whole neighborhood. It was a violent, ugly sound, birds scattered like shrapnel. By the time the lunch hour rolled around, the majestic canopy was gone, just a terrible gaping hole in the sky. Huge, thick slabs of my tree lay sprawling across my lawn, smelling of raw, dying sap. And where was Beverly? Standing nearby, sipping iced tea from a crystal glass, supervising like a conductor directing a symphony of destruction. She even yelled, "Careful with the fence line!" and grind that stump deep. "We don't want any unsightly regrowth." She was literally enjoying the execution of my history. When I finally pulled into my driveway at 5:30 p.m., the sight hit me like a physical blow. It was surreal. Where my friend, my guardian, my sycamore had stood for 40 years, there was only a pale, jagged stump and a field of churned-up earth. The silence was the worst part. The air felt thin, exposed, wrong. And of course, there was Beverly emerging from her house, radiant, smiling like she'd just won the Nobel Peace Prize. "Tom! Oh, there you are," she chirped, waving her accursed clipboard. "It's gone. You'll thank me later when your property value instantly shoots up. It was an eyesore. I just stood there, staring at the stump, then back at her. The shock slowly gave way to this cold, white-hot fury. "You did this," I finally managed, my voice shaking. "Of course," she said, as if it were the most mundane thing. The board made an executive decision. It was a liability. "The board has no executive power to trespass and destroy private property," I snapped, the sound echoing down the street. Curtains twitched in half a dozen windows, but nobody dared step out. They knew the beast they were dealing with. She sniffed, adjusting her visor. "Actually, under Section 4C of the governing bylaws, no bylaw gives you the right to forge documents and steal what's mine." I cut her off, my voice raw with disbelief. I told her in no uncertain terms to get off my property before I called the actual police, not her little HOA enforcement detail. She rolled her eyes, muttered something about ungrateful, messy homeowners, and strutted back into her clean, cold house. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch just staring at the empty, dark sky where the familiar leaves used to rustle. It felt like a robbery, a violation of the soul of my home, committed purely out of spite and a thirst for control. First thing next morning, I called the sheriff's department. They sent Sheriff Kyle Daniels, a tall, calm guy with a weary look that suggested he'd seen every flavor of neighbor versus neighbor absurdity there was. He took photos, read my arborist's reports, and shook his head. "Mr. Sterling," he said, folding his pad, "what you're describing is criminal mischief, destruction of private property, and potentially fraud. We're opening a full investigation. This woman went way too far." The neighborhood was buzzing, of course. Everybody was gossiping, partly because they loved drama, but mostly because they were secretly thrilled that someone, finally, had decided to stand up to Beverly Kincaid. Around mid-morning, Sheriff Daniels arrived to follow up. He was meticulous, making calls and taking notes, pulling out the full legal file. "I'm just going to park my cruiser right here for a minute," he said, pointing to the curb directly across the street from my yard, right where the biggest section of the remaining tree debris was piled. His county-issued black-and-white SUV, gleaming and official, settled perfectly into place, a beautiful, solid symbol of law and order, and as if cued by a spotlight, Beverly appeared. She came clicking down her driveway, visor perfectly aligned, clipboard ready for battle. "Sheriff," she called, her voice falsely pleasant, "I assume you're here about Tom's ridiculous overreaction?" Daniels looked up, one eyebrow arched. I'm gathering facts, ma'am. Well, you can save yourself the trouble, she said, crossing her arms, oozing condescension. The HOA authorized this for safety. I was simply following procedure. He flipped open her folder of documentation. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up, his expression utterly flat. Ma'am, he stated evenly, none of these documents bear an official HOA letterhead. There's no county permit and no signatures from any other board member. These are merely printouts of internal notes you appear to have typed and signed yourself. That's not how authorization works on private property. Her perfect composure cracked. Her face flushed a patchy pink. I was protecting the community, she insisted, waving her hands. That tree was a liability, a menace. I stepped forward, unable to help myself. You forged papers, Beverly. You destroyed a perfectly healthy tree out of spite. Mr. Sterling, you're simply overreacting, she shot back, forcing a thin smile. The neighborhood looks much cleaner without that overgrown thing. You owe me a thank you, the sheriff sighed, closing the folder with a sharp snap. Ma'am, I strongly suggest you remain available for further questioning. What you did constitutes serious charges, destruction of private property and criminal trespass. That is not a misunderstanding. Beverly opened her mouth to argue, her confidence finally buckling. But before she could, the roar of an engine interrupted her. The same white truck from Premier Tree and Land was back, returning to finish the massive cleanup. One of the workers was maneuvering a huge, partially sawed chunk of the sycamore trunk, a thick, uneven beast of wood, maybe 4 feet wide, dangling awkwardly from the loader's chains. Careful! Beverly shrieked, instantly reverting to her managerial microcontrolling mode. I told you to stack those away from the curb. You are being reckless. The worker gave her an irritated look. Lady, we're just cleaning up. And we've been told to hold off any heavy grinding until the sheriff's investigation is clear. Refusing to be ignored, Beverly marched even closer to the crew, right up to the pile. You will finish what you started, or I will report you for breach of contract. You are unprofessional. Ma'am, I strongly suggest you step back, Sheriff Daniels warned, his voice low and serious. You are interfering with an active investigation and a work crew. But Beverly Kincaid never listened. She stood there, clipboard jammed against her hip, gesturing angrily, completely oblivious to the massive chunk of wood swaying precariously above her head. And then it happened. There was a sudden, sickening metallic clank. The chain, stressed by the weight and the awkward angle, slipped. The giant trunk section dropped, hit the pavement with a thunderous, earth-shaking crash, and started to roll. Slowly at first, then gaining momentum, that enormous, angry piece of sycamore gathered speed down the gentle slope of the street. Beverly screamed. Stumbling back, her clipboard flying, the trunk kept rolling. An unstoppable act of natural, delayed justice. It slammed, with a deafening crunch of metal and splintering wood, squarely into the driver's side of Sheriff Daniels' pristine black-and-white cruiser. Silence. A stunned, shocked silence fell over Willow Creek. The trunk came to rest against the totally smashed hood, the impact craterizing the metal and spiderwebbing the windshield. Comically, a single dried sycamore ball rolled off the trunk and plinked onto the ground. Sheriff Daniels just stared at his totaled patrol car, then slowly turned his head to Beverly Kincaid, who was frozen, mouth open, all the color draining from her face. That wasn't my fault, she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the workers. They weren't being careful. Ma'am, the sheriff said, his voice quiet, dangerously calm. You were told to step back. You ignored a direct instruction and interfered with the crew. You have just added destruction of county government property to your list of legal problems. By now, half the street had gathered, peeking from behind their driveways, trying desperately to hide their utter, delighted shock. For once in her life, Beverly Kincaid was utterly speechless. The sheriff radioed for backup. When the second unit arrived, they took her formal statement, and then the moment of pure cinematic satisfaction. They politely asked her to accompany them to the station. Watching Beverly Kincaid, the queen of regulation, the high priestess of the HOA, climbing reluctantly into the back of a police SUV was, frankly, the most beautiful sunset I'd seen in years. Jeff, my other neighbor, walked over and clapped me on the shoulder, grinning from ear to ear. You couldn't have written that ending, Tom, he said. Karma is a sycamore, I laughed, a tired, slightly relieved laugh. Yeah, I said softly, looking at the stump. I guess nature decided to have the final word. In the weeks that followed, the consequences hit Beverly like a truck. Or rather, a rolling log. The county prosecutor took the case seriously. She was fined heavily for fraud, trespass, and property destruction. The sheriff's office billed her for the full replacement cost of the cruiser. And the Willow Creek Preserve Board, utterly embarrassed by the whole public spectacle, voted her out as president in a landslide, effective immediately. As for me, I hired a different, better landscaping company. I didn't just grind the stump. I had a brand new, strong sapling planted right in the same spot. It's small now, just a little stick with hope, and it will take decades to regain the majesty of the sycamore I lost. But I find peace in that, because life and justice has a way of restoring balance. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes, if the universe is feeling particularly dramatic, it just takes one heavy, rolling chunk of wood to get the job done. The neighborhood is quiet again. The lawns are trimmed, the fences are perfect. But now, when people drive down Willow Creek, they don't just see a quiet street. They see the spot where the tree fought back. So, tell me, have you ever dealt with a Beverly Kincaid in your life? Someone who abuses a tiny bit of power? Who tries to control every blade of grass and finally gets their due? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your HOA horror stories, your moments of sweet, sweet karma. Hit that like button if you think the sycamore was just giving the sheriff a high five, and subscribe for more stories of life, law, and utterly insane neighbors. Thanks for listening, folks. Stay safe out there.